Good morning. I'd like to call the Finance Committee meeting to order. Roll call.
Mr. Eckhoff?
Present.
Mr. Fairfield?
Present.
Mr. Hess?
Present.
Ms. Polk?
Present.
Ms. Weber?
Present.
Ms. Parker?
Present.
Mr. Seroy? Mr. Swanson?
Present.
Mr. Featherling?
Present.
Mr. Dunio?
Present.
Mr. Miller?
Present.
Mr. Long?
Present.
Mr. Hunter?
Present.
Mr. Whaler? Mr. Alexander Hamilton?
Present.
We have a quorum.
Can I have a motion for Mr. Long? I was trying to cover that up for you. Good morning, Mr. Hamilton.
Just rolled.
Can I have a motion to allow Mr. Long to enter via Zoom? First by Dunnell, second by Fairfield. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next up, public comment. I have one from a Deborah Brewers. Back microphone. Yep. Good morning.
Good morning. Dawn Brewers. I'm the director of
Dawn, I'm
42
sorry.
Community Outreach. It's all right. This is my first time at a county board meeting, so thanks for having me. Thanks for your time. I just wanted to come today to try to clear up some confusion that was pretty clear last month at the Finance Committee meeting. We had applied for the county ARPA funds, and we were pretty clear. We had communicated a couple times through email, but also it was clear in our application that we were applying for funds to fund the operation of our emergency overnight homeless shelter. We had also, it was no secret, we had communicated by email, and also at our public, we had a public meeting with officials. Chairman Weber had attended, and we had a conversation about the fact that if we were able to get funding for the emergency shelter, then we would be able to divert unrestricted funds to our construction project. So the ARPA funds were not for construction. We knew that the county ARPA funds were not going to fund brick and mortar construction. So we felt like that was pretty clearly communicated. And then, as you probably know, between, we received a letter that's saying from the county board that you were not recommending our, let me get the wording right, not recommending our request to move forward with that grant. And so between that time we received this letter and the next, your Finance Committee, we had pulled out of our construction project due to the funding concerns and some other complications we were having with the city. And I did email Chairman Weber to let him know of that. I'm sorry, thank you, Chairman Wheeler, to clarify where we were at with that position. We had not officially responded to the letter simply because we were just in flux. We you had said in the letter that you would reconsider and endorse a proposal for day shelter. That was a program that we had never had and don't currently have. And so we were just in flux about what we could do with that. And as we stand right now, it appears that at least in the foreseeable future, day sheltering may be all that we are able to do for the homeless. And so that is something that we could consider now and definitely want to open that dialogue. We have sent several emails, both to the grant email here in the letter and to Chairman Wheeler, and have not had a response. So we're definitely wanting to have that conversation. So hopefully someone can get in touch with us. We're happy to have that conversation further, but we just wanted to clear that up. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is the approval of minutes from April 26, 2023. Can I have a motion? Motion by Mr. Hunter, second by Mr. Dunnell. Any comments or corrections? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Aye.
Next, can I have a motion to enter executive session, collective bargaining, 5 ILCS 122C2? Mr. Miller, second by Mr. Dunnell. And this will be a roll call.
Mr. Eckhoff?
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield?
Aye.
Mr. Hess?
Aye.
Ms. Polk?
Aye.
Ms. Weber?
Aye.
Ms. Parker?
Aye.
Mr. Swanson?
Aye.
Mr. Featherling?
Aye.
Mr. Daniel,
Aye.
Mr. Miller,
Aye.
Mr. Long,
Aye.
Mr. Hunter,
Yes.
Mr. Wheeler, Mr. Alexander Hildebrand.
All right, we are going to go ahead and go into executive session. If everybody in the back of the room could go ahead and go into the hall. Is the microphone on? All right, we're back from executive session. Can I have a motion to authorize the county board chairman or his representative to sign the agreement between the highway department collective bargaining agreement? Mr. Dunnell, second by Ms. Weber. Any?
Unanimous second?
Okay, unanimous second. Everybody's okay with that? Any discussion? If not, roll call.
Mr. Eckhoff?
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield?
Aye.
Mr. Hess?
Aye.
Ms. Polk?
Aye.
Ms. Weber? Ms. Parker? Mr. Swanson?
Aye.
Mr. Featherling?
Aye.
Mr. Dunnell?
Aye.
Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Mr. Long?
Aye.
Mr. Hunter?
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler? Mr. Alexander Hildebrand?
Aye.
Motion carries. Next up is the medical insurance review with Mike Lynch. Good morning, sir.
How are you, sir?
Doing well.
You have two pieces of information in front of you from reports that Blue Cross sends to us monthly. But before we start on those, let me make a few comments relative to last year and how the year ended up, because many of you who have been on this committee know that we typically get the renewal in August for that following year on 1/1. So as you can recognize, you're dealing with approximately 8 months of data at that point, negotiating for a new rate going into the upcoming year. But it's instructive to look back and see how the year ended up. And so I'm just verbally gonna go over what we saw, because if you'll remember, we received initially last year around a 10% increase. But as we saw the data, we believed we had a better position than that, and Blue Cross worked with us, and we got it down, I believe it was 5.5%. And in summary, the year 2022 ended up, we had 33 less total bodies. I don't know what that corresponded to in just pure employee life, but it was not very many. In finance, 22 versus 21, medically we were down around 21% in terms of total claims. From pharmacy claims and cost expenses, we were down about 14%. And so when they looked at it, the group liability 1 year versus the next was down about 19.5%. Now, at that time, when we got the renewal last year, I believe it was running in the 85% plus range. The average loss ratio as it ended up was right around 79.6, so it became a better group as time went on, which is reflected in why I believe that we got down to that 5%, which really resulted in a protection against inflation going into the next year. In terms of network savings, it's always instructive to look back. About 62.5% of the claims submitted were reduced, or that was the average reduction, 62.5, I said that incorrectly. And there was about a 98.4% usage of the Blue Cross Blue Shield network. Last year, claims between $100,000 and $150,000, we had one claimant. Over $150,000, we had 0, but we did have 50 claimants that had $50,000 of claims or more. One of those was a female, age 64, and she is no longer on the group. We don't know who that was, but it just states that. And of those 2019 are still insured. As a point of reference, I looked up the current information here in 2023, and right now we've got 5 claimants of $50,000 or more. Two of those, a male and a female, are both 65 or over. And in the report itself, we'll see the specifics of that. Now, I wanted to make a comment going into the reports, what we see in trend. And you'll remember we talk about that every year in addition to what the experience is. What does the company, the carriers, see in terms of medical inflation? And I got a pretty good email this week from the Midwest manager in Springfield explaining how Blue Cross sets out these trend perspectives. Right now, Blue Cross believes the consumer price index is about 7.7%. And typically, inflation, medical inflation, is 2 times that. So, as you can obviously see, that could be 14 or 15% based on the 7.7. Now, Blue Cross wants to make the case, and I think has, in terms of its data last year and so on, that their cost of care is less than the marketplace's cost of care because of their network discounts. Blue Cross, Blue Shield's trend in the medical field right now, average, that's their book of business, around 3.8%. The industry is somewhere around 8.0%. Pharmaceutical, their internal non-specialty medicines trend is around 6.8%. Their specialty trend is around 13%. Right now, the average industry for both combined is around 12%. So that gives you a start to looking at where we're at in terms of that. Now, when we come to August, they'll have data looking back 12 months previous and then the previous 12 months beyond that. And that's how we've done this ever since we've been involved with Blue Cross. So at that point, you'll see one of your packets is Blue Insight Monthly Financial Report. And down at the bottom, it says 1/1/23 to 4/30. So that's the first 4 months of the year. And what you're going to see here is the first page is the enrollment overview. And it just shows you basically that in terms of single subscribers, we start off with 409. Right now we're sitting on, or through April, about 413 lives. Then when you go to the next column, you'll see medical members, and that means everybody that's in either a single children or family tier added into that. So we've got 870 medical members and ended up in April 879. So below you can see on both sides of the page, it gives you enrollment by tier. And below that, there's the guide, employee only, employee plus one, employee plus dependents and family, and then an enrollment by gender. Right now, all of those things are very much similar to the prior period, which been a year ago. Turning to the next page, the nitty-gritty is the financial summary. And up in the left-hand corner, you'll see they call this the medical order of reduction. It just shows us from left to right. You'll see the paid month. Right now they're looking at April of 2023, and in terms of the billings for the month, there was $1,302,000. Then you'll go over to the next, and they'll show that January 22 through April 22, that 4-month period, a year ago, there was $4,734,000. And right now, you'll see submitted in the 23 year, there's about a 27.4% increase in what was billed. Now, I highlighted in yellow, you'll see of those billings, what was covered. The next line is of those billings, what is the discount factor that Blue Cross allows? And then of that, what is allowed to be considered to be reimbursable. And even still there, we've got about a 31% increase. So if you go down to the last column, the medical paid, in that month of 23, the medical paid was $304,000. A year ago was $1,152,000. In this current span of 23 in the 4 months, $1,562,000. So again, it just shows you from top to bottom, we've got a hot period coming into this first part of the year. And so below, we see that the group liability breakdown by medical and pharmacy, again, right to left, and total paid claims, and then at the bottom, the group liability. So again, no matter how you cut it, we're right up in the high 20% range of increased claim activity. And I will say that last year, we had a similar takeoff. And as you saw, we came back to kind of a plateau in a lesser percentage range. If you want to move to the next page, page 7, this shows the medical and pharmacy loss ratio, and this looks straight from April back to May of 22. And you'll see on the right side of the column, and as I said just a second ago, you'll see some very singularly pretty good month-to-month representations there. And at the bottom right now, our loss ratio is running around 85.3%. So it could be a whole heck of a lot worse, as we've seen in some years in the 90s, and unfortunately in the 100%. So we're still good, in a good position to possibly make kind of a recovery going towards the year end. But it is 5.7% higher than what was there at the beginning of the year. The next page shows you, and many of you who've been on this committee for a long time have heard us talk about high-cost claimants. And that's where we've had some strong problems occur. And last year, you heard me to begin with 20-some. You'll see the first two there from left to right to the page. The subscriber and spouse, the first two, one is a male 65 and over, one's a female 65 and over. Cancer is the first person's leading diagnostic category, and injury and poisoning. You can see it represents quite a bit of a number of things. But at the end, you'll see what their paid expenses were and whether they are still enrolled. And I only make mention of that is, and when you see no, you know, the problem's been somewhat nipped in the bud, but when you see yes, that means the claim is ongoing. And so right now, we've got 5 people in that position. The last page here is kind of the same financial concept as we looked at earlier medically, but this is towards the pharmaceutical area. And this is somewhat shocking in the sense that it's very good in a great sense. There's only been a change of about 1.7% last year to this year, so we're not undergoing some radical anomaly. And the paid basis is about 2.3. I mean, we're seeing 12.5% and 20% increases in expenses in pharmacy. So this is well below those averages. Below that, you can see that the total paid versus specialty paid, and then you'll see at the bottom there the prior period and then the current period. And they're both not dissimilar, so we're just as the percentages say above that, we're in pretty good shape. The second report scenario you'll see on the front there is called the Blue Insight Utilization Analysis Report. It's incurred under one basis, but I kind of pay attention to the paid numbers, which line up with what we've been talking about here. And if you'd go to the executive summary, we don't have to drill down too far. This summary is a really good report and tells you what you kind of need to know in short. The county's overall enrollment decreased about 1.4%. It gives an average age right there at 33, 34 years of age. The gender mix is 51.8 female, 48.2 male. That's a pretty good scenario, if you will. When you look at the marketplaces, I've seen groups that have average ages into the 40s, and now you start seeing a stepped up claim basis. So this is a kind of a young group in a great sense. So that's a very positive thing. Overall paid membership, paid per member per month, decreased during this period by 4.7% between these reporting periods. The service category that was impacted the most was outpatient facilities, decreased 16%. And the paid per member per month for Kankakee County was 12.2% lower than the benchmark, which in this case would be the book of business Blue Cross has available. And then by section, inpatient down 7.2%, outpatient down 16%. Professional paid per member per month is up about 10.2%. Which is not always a negative. It's a positive in the greatest sense, because you have to presume, and we can drill down to this, knowing what's routine and you know what's for medical purposes only. The medical services expense decreased 3.6%, 4.7% lower than the benchmark. Pharmacy decreased 8.7%. So again, there's several positives in there looking forward. The diagnostic categories per member per month are listed there: musculoskeletal, circulatory, health status, and injury. Those four diagnostic categories accounted for about 47.6% of the overall expenses. High cost claimants, total expenses decreased 12.9%. The proportion of paid expenses due high cost claimants decreased very slightly. Below that, paid membership or paid per member per month, ER visits decreased. That's always good. Total ER visits decreased 5.9%, but was still 1.1% higher than the benchmark. And lastly, primary care physicians accounted for 40% of the professional visits, compared to 34% of as a benchmark. And as was noted above, PCPs accounted for 48% of the professional office expenses. So the next page kind of builds upon all those statistics, and right now they're telling you that by the month you can multiply that out and get a per member annual figure is at $469.27, which is a drop of 4.7% from last year. It's 12.2% lower than the benchmark. And then you'll see below that in the center 4.7 drifting out to all those cost expenses, and you can see where they line up in each area of that report. If you want to move towards page 14, which is the next page to flip over, it tells you about these high cost claimants. It's right now about 1.84. They're telling you the benchmark is 1.86, so we pretty well match up there. This accounted for 16 high-cost claimants in the prior period, 27.6% of the total paid. And then below that, you can see that about 18.8% of those people were repeat high-cost claimants. The total paid for them was about $1.3 million. 75 employees, or 70%, and 55% is the benchmark, so a little higher than the benchmark. Average age of those persons, 52 versus the benchmark of 47. And then they break out female under the same basis. A couple more pages, or one more pages if you'll flip. I gave you a listing here of those 16 persons just to show, you know, the disposition of how some of these claimants come out. You'll see from the left to the right who it is, their age, gender band, what the leading diagnostic category is. The county's been, unfortunately, a high neoplasms group. Here we don't see as many right now, which is a good thing. Then they say the leading diagnostic category. Then you can see from the inpatient paid, outpatient, professional, pharmacy breakdown, then the total. And then again, they'll check their prior high-cost claimant. And you see only really here in that time period, I think 3 of 16 were priors. The rest of them were not priors, but then they show you the prior paid in terms of whether it was yes or no. I mean, it might have been under different circumstance they're showing that, but it just shows you a little bit about, you know, the high-cost claimants. So I would say going into renewal, what we need to watch out for is these high-cost claimants. We're going to have to deal with that if that grows again. If it doesn't grow again, we'll be very lucky, I would say. And hopefully that loss ratio stays in, you know, that mid-range. 79 to 85% is very, very good in a great sense, because, as I said, we've seen years where it's been in the 90s, it's been in the hundreds, and that's when you don't have a lot of things to stand on to have them help you get that number down. So we will be looking at the marketplace to see what we get, but we want to get the renewal first to see if there's a worthy competitor out there. But I will end by saying we get an awful lot from this carrier. I don't want to prop them up too high, but they're one of the best carriers in our marketplace, and I say that knowing I only have 5 to 7 marketplace players at any given time to go to. In the old days, I could have told you we had 13, 14, 15. We don't have that anymore. So we rely on the carrier to help us manage the high claimants. And that's the point of reference. We're dealing with claims here in a big group. And just because a rate goes up sometimes doesn't tell the whole story in terms of whether the carrier itself is being competitive. Can they help us control these things? And that goes back to what I said to begin with. I'm not just flagrantly being a fan of Blue Cross. We know they're one of the better ones in the marketplace from those perspectives. So, questions?
Chairman Wheeler.
Yes, sir.
Thanks. I just got a few dozen. Are we still going to get a renewal in September? Because we have to build our budget for next year.
I've asked for that as early in August as possible.
Yeah.
But as I said early, Andy, sometimes you'd like to finish closer to the renewal date rather than earlier. But to get it in September, you've got to request it in August to be.
Yeah, we need to build a budget, and this being probably our second largest expense outside of payroll dollars, we need that.
Yep.
At least a starting point for negotiation.
Right. I hope to have it by no later than August 24th, which is where we got it last year.
Sure. With do you see the market releasing the pent-up demand from COVID? Is part of these I want to say with electives, you know, knee replacements, stuff they've been waiting on that was non-critical.
I don't see it in yours. Yeah, I don't see it strongly in this case, nor have I seen it strongly in the area. But yes, there are some. There's very much some of that. Some people went right out of last year into the 22 year and saw some of that. But in the high expense here, I believe it's part of it, but not all of it. I see a lot of new claimants here that, you know, are bringing expenses forward. And to be able to define it, I'm not sure, but it's certainly a part of it, but I don't see it as a great part of it, to be honest. I think some of the physicians' visits could explain some of that, yeah. And we've talked about that almost at every group that we've been at. We were at a 1,200 person group, and the same point of reference has come. There's high cost claimants, but some of this seems to be cancers, some of this seems to be other kinds of expenses that aren't explained by COVID. But
Well, I
there
guess-
is some of
Sure,
that.
Sure. And last question, are we, because this is fully insured, I don't think we can have this data, but are we able to look at high loss claimants in terms of our retiree pool? And compare what's going on there? Because sometimes you can spin the retirees off into a
Separate group.
separate group, but it's the same plan that we're
Yeah.
contractually obligated to.
I believe we can get that report. It won't tell you, it will not identify anybody, but it can, I think, be driven by age.
Okay.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
That'll be it. Thank you. I'll get that report then.
Next up, electric aggregation renewal. Good morning.
Morning. All right, my name's Adam Hoover. I'm with NYMEC, and we are the county's energy consultant. And so we've been helping currently with the municipal aggregation program that is expiring in September. So the first thing, just a quick review. The aggregation program allows for, it's a program sponsored and supported by the state of Illinois that pretty much allows for the bulk purchasing of electricity on the residents' behalf. So kind of putting everyone together to hopefully find a better rate. So the current program expires in September. So the first thing that we always do is we look to see if we can save residents money. I believe you have a little price matrix in your packet that shows you the rates. We were very excited that we thought we were going to find some savings about 2 months ago. The current ComEd rate that we are all paying, if you're on ComEd, is 9.7 cents this month. It has now, and it drops from June to June, so June of next month to about May of 2024 is when ComEd has their fixed rate for next year. So we were hopeful we were going to find savings. Unfortunately, ComEd dropped their annualized ComEd rate to 7 cents. And also, this is not part of aggregation. It gets confusing, but just to be clear, you will not see monster savings on your own personal ComEd bill, because ComEd is also raising their prices on their taxes and delivery and a couple other portions. So before you get very excited that your ComEd bill may drop by $20, $30, it won't. So that is regardless of aggregation. I'll explain that in a second. So what we come to you is kind of our backup option. Like I said, our first option is always trying to find resident savings. We cannot do that, unfortunately. We're very close, and we're hopeful we can do it again next year. And so kind of our backup option is what we are currently running, which is the ComEd Rate Match Program. That allows residents to be guaranteed to pay the same as the ComEd rate. So there will be no change to the ComEd rate. There will be no rate difference. There will be no billing difference. There are many residents that are currently part of this program now. And in turn, our best supplier, MC Squared, would have a civic payment of $36,000. It would be a 1-year and by the way, that $36,000 is not earmarked. It can be spent anyway. It doesn't have to be to a green energy program or whatever. So that just goes to the county for whatever needs it may be. We are suggesting they're offering a 2-year deal, to be clear, but I think Chairman Wheeler and I are suggesting a 1-year deal, as we are hopeful that next year we can start finding resident savings or a better ComEd rate match program or whatever. So we're recommending a 1-year deal.
Any comments? Chairman Wheeler.
Pretty much summed it up. You know, we enjoyed, you know, you may remember, this isn't obviously Mr. Holmes and his organization, but natural gas we bought 2.5 years ago, and we didn't, because we saw the market potentially going this direction. Nobody saw the Ukraine, obviously.
Right.
But in this case, we don't think getting into a 3-year or 2-year arrangement would be prudent, because the market will correct. We just don't know which way it's
Right.
still going to go. So my thought is tread water for a year, as long, and the local residents on the, you know, in the rural areas, if you will, and those within small municipalities that are with us won't see an increase over the ComEd rate, which is about the best. Well, it is the best that can be done
Yeah.
at this point. Yeah.
Thank you. Ms. Weber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wonder, would you state what that rate is, just to be clear from this chart? What is the rate
The current, so
that you're recommending?
So it is not on that chart
it's not.
because if we found a number on there that was under 7,
Yeah.
then we would recommend that because that would achieve resident savings.
Oh.
We have not found that from our supplier, so we are not recommending that. And so our new program guarantees that residents pay the ComEd rate.
Whatever.
And so it may spike up. I don't want to bore you with ComEd rates, but they move by ½ cent. So if it moves up ½ cent, residents would pay that. If it moves down, they would pay that. So there would be no change to a resident.
Thanks for clearing.
Yep, good question.
Any other comments? Can I have a motion to enter into a 1-year agreement? Motion by Mr. Hunter, second by Mr. Fairfield. Any discussion?
Should we name MC squared?
Okay.
I think we should name which one we're choosing.
MC squared, motion for 1 year. First and second recognizes that. Okay. Any other discussion? Roll call.
Mr. Eckhoff?
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield?
Aye.
Mr. Hess?
Aye.
Ms. Polk?
Aye.
Ms. Weber? Ms. Parker? Mr. Swanson? Mr. Featherling?
Aye.
Mr. Donnell? Mr. Miller?
Aye.
Mr. Long?
Aye.
Mr. Hunter? Mr. Wheeler? Mr. Alexander Hildebrand?
Thank you, sir. Next up is the Finance Department, Mr. McCarty.
I don't know if those are approved.
Not yet. Good morning, Steve.
Good morning. First on the agenda will be Carmen Huizinga from SKDO to do their annual update on the audit of fiscal year 22.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Like you said, I'm Carmen Huizinga. I'm from SKDO. I also have Jackie Miles with me, and she's sitting in the back. Jackie's our audit manager at the firm, and both of us have significant responsibilities regarding the audit of the county. So today I'll just go over a summary of the highlights of the audit and the status of the audit, and then we can be on our way. The primary objective of an audit is for us to look at your financial statements and then provide an opinion on whether they are materially correct. So this year we have an unmodified opinion, which means it's a clean opinion. And that has been the same for several years. That's no change. We also are required to do the audit under government auditing standards. And so we issue a report on your internal control over financial reporting. It also reports any compliance matters. We did note one deficiency in internal control over financial reporting, so that is in your packets if you want to read through that more closely. And the county and the health department have each provided corrective action plans for those items. And then one piece is a possible non-compliance item. We are still in the process of gathering final documentation on that, maybe even as soon as today. So it's possible that it will not be a non-compliance issue. It's written up that way for you to see in that draft that's in your packets, but that will go away if we get the proper documentation. So. Other items that we'll be communicating to you is a required communications to governance, and generally speaking, that's boilerplate language. And then we'll also have a management letter with recommendations. Those are being finalized currently. The items in your packet is a very, very small portion of the entire annual comprehensive financial report. When that's all said and done, the final report will probably be close to 190 pages. You have about 20 here. So it's the main financials from the front of the annual report. So in that annual report, you're going to find about a 18 to 20 page management's discussion and analysis, and that's a high-level overview of the financial statements written by the finance department. I would highly recommend that when the full report is out that you read through that. It gives you a good overview and it gives the highlights of the year, and it's written in readable language for everybody. All right. First, highlights of the financial information. The statement of net position is a high-level summarized balance sheet, basically. And it's just 2 columns, governmental activities and business type activities. The governmental activities is your general fund, tort pension, all the special funds. And then the business type activities consists of ETSB and animal control. And then you also have fiduciary funds, where the county is responsible for being the custodian of those funds, but those funds are not available to the county for county's operations. So those are not included in this statement of net position. The total net position at the end of November of 22 was $94 million, which was an increase of $21 million over the prior year. The net position in your governmental activities consists of 3 categories. So there's net investment in capital assets of $46.9 million, and then a restricted net position of $36.2 million. And restricted means that you can't just spend it for anything you want. It's either restricted by a levy or by a statute on how those funds can be spent. And then that leaves an unrestricted net position deficit of $1.5 million, which sounds like maybe a negative thing. However, that is an improvement of $16.1 million of a deficit in the prior year. And that is pretty normal on these entity-wide statements for governments to have a deficit unrestricted balance, just due to the nature of the capital assets and the investments you have in that, and then all of those restricted funds. In business type activities, the net position is $12.4 million. Most of that is unrestricted and obviously will be spent for purposes of ETSB and animal control. One significant item on your statement of net position is your liabilities, your long-term liabilities. So long-term liabilities totaled $17.9 million. There was a net decrease of $5.3 million. There was one bond issued during the year for $1.5 million to fund, I believe, animal control facilities. And there was a $4.6 million decrease in a pension liability. And that's an estimate. That's somewhat volatile year to year. But that's where on these statements you're seeing the most movement. Last year and this year, there have been huge improvements in the market and things like that that have improved your position with your net pension liability. Also included in those liabilities are other post-employment benefits. So the county, under certain collective bargaining agreements, is committed to paying or subsidizing some health insurance for certain departments after employees retire. And then also in that is an estimated compensated absences, again, under certain collective bargaining agreements. There's sick pay that is paid out upon retirement. So those are all estimates. There is a chart in the packet that I gave you. We lifted that out of the financial statements for the total liabilities if you want to see some more of those details. The income statement for governmental activities and business type activities is called the Statement of Activities, and it's organized in a net expense format. So it lists your total expenses by function, general government, court services, public safety, and so on. And then it will be offset by any charges for services and grants and contributions that are coming in towards those functions to come down to a net expense amount that then is required to be funded somehow, and generally that's funded by your tax revenues and other general revenues, which are shown at the bottom of that statement. Consistent with past years, public safety is the largest function of the county, followed by transportation, general government, and court services. A couple of highlights: the governmental activities increase in net position was 18.8 million, and the increase in business type activities net position was 2.2 million. Following those high-level summarized financial statements are the governmental funds financial statements. So that's a little bit more detail, and that's more the format that you are used to seeing regularly throughout the year from the finance department. So it breaks it out by your major funds, and then there's one column that just aggregates all the remaining funds. So your major funds for fiscal year 22 were the general fund, pension fund, highway fund, county bridge, and then both of the ARPA funds. And just as a clarification, the tort activity is also rolled up in the general fund column. The combined general fund ended with a positive fund balance of 11.3 million. So that continues the increasing trend of the last 4 years. Prior to 2019, the general fund had deficit fund balances. So for the last 4 years, you've been continuing to build a positive fund balance, which in turn has helped your ratings, your bond ratings, and things like that, and just puts everybody in a more comfortable position month to month, right, Steve?
Didn't think we'd ever see.
So I think a factor of that is having some of those ARPA funds available to fund some of those lost revenue items that were identified, and able to get some of those capital projects in place that maybe you were putting off or couldn't have done otherwise. So revenues increased by $5.2 million in the general fund over fiscal year 21, and expenditures only increased by 1.9 million. The primary increase in revenues was due to those increases in some tax and intergovernmental revenues. Replacement taxes, as I know you've seen, doubled from 1.7 million in fiscal year 21 to 3.5 million in fiscal year 22. And all municipalities and governmental entities are seeing that across the state. There was also an increase in inmate revenues and related expenditures. Those usually go hand in hand. As they get more inmates, they have increased expenses. And then the increase in expenses was primarily due to additional capital projects in various departments. And also on the financials, you continue to recognize the revenue from the sale of the juvenile detention center. That happened a few years back, and fiscal year 22 is the last year of that. So all of that should be final now. I mentioned those business type activities before. In the governmental funds, they're called enterprise funds. So ETSB is considered a major fund. The net position in cash increased by 2 million and 1.8 million respectively. Their revenues at ETSB do continue to outpace expenses, but that's with the continued goal of building proper reserves for future infrastructure improvements and maintenance. I mentioned those fiduciary funds that are held by the county but not to be able to be used for the county's operations. Some of those more significant ones include the county collector fund, where you're collecting all those taxes and then distributing them to all of the other governmental entities throughout the county. The circuit clerk, which includes the bonds and fees of others that they're holding in the court system until all those things go through the docket. And then the county clerk and the sheriff commissary are two other significant ones. The remaining annual report includes the footnotes to the financial statements and a lot of supplementary information. There was a new GASB, Government Accounting Standards Board, accounting statement that was implemented during fiscal year 22. It's on leases, and it really didn't have an impact except on just a little bit of terminology in the fiscal year 22 report. But in the future, if you are leasing a building from somebody else or leasing something to another entity, those items, even if they're just operating leases, will end up on the balance sheet. So it becomes like an intangible right to use asset if you're leasing from somebody, and then it becomes a receivable, long-term receivable, if you're receiving it from somebody else. So if you enter into any of those agreements in the future, they will have an impact.
Chairman Wheeler.
Just, I know, I'll plant the seed now. Regional Office of Education, acting out theater. I don't know if that agreement's between us or the owner of the building. You see what, I think that's what you're getting at. We lease space to them at acting out
Yes,
down at
and we
school.
analyzed that lease between the county and the regional office, and the rate that they're paying is really below market value, and so it kind of gets kicked out and doesn't qualify under the criteria of the new leasing standard. So if some governmental entities will enter things for $1, things like that. So those things are kicked out. And when we did an analysis of the ROE arrangement, it was below market value. So therefore it didn't meet the criteria we didn't have to go through all the calculations to get it on the balance sheet.
Gotcha, thank you.
And then there's also materiality that you always want to keep in mind. So if something is not material, you look at cost benefit of going through the disclosures and the calculations and all of that versus just expensing it like you always have. So there were no new disclosures this year in the financial statements. Like I said, that supplementary information will contain budgetary comparisons for all of the various funds and combining statements to show you what is rolling up into those numbers in the front. There's also a statistical information section. So if you're into statistics and like to see trends, there's a lot of 10-year trends. There's some economic information, some long-term debt information. There's other, I don't know, it's not anecdotal, but different statistics about how many employees or how many assets or, things like that. We also issue a couple of compliance reports in conjunction with the audit. So there's a single audit that is performed every year, and that's because the county spends more than $750,000 of money that originates at the federal level. So this year, the county's federal expenditures were, I think they were over 9 million, maybe close to 9.5 million. So we do compliance work there. We're required to select, based on various criteria, certain grants that we look at specifically. And one of the grants was a COVID tracing grant that we looked at. We did have one finding on that. And so we've been working with the health department on that. They're providing a corrective action plan. So that will be addressed that way. And then we also do a circuit clerk compliance audit. And the AOIC changed some of the reporting requirements on that and made it much more detailed. And there's additional reports that are included. So we have those completed, or the circuit clerk completed them, and we've audited them. They're not all final and rolled up into a really pretty report, but essentially the work is done and we did not have any findings there. Those were the highlights that I had. So I just want to thank the county board for giving us the opportunity to do your audit. And I want to do a special thank you to the finance department and all the remaining department heads who cooperate with us. And we always have very, very good luck with dealing with all the department heads and no difficulties. Everybody's very responsive. So we definitely appreciate that. Does anybody have any other questions?
Questions from the committee? Mr. Hunter?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if there were highlights, but you did a pretty good job with specificity. A couple things. You mentioned we took a hit with respect to the health department. As you well know, they have their own board, and I guess we're still held accountable for that. And you're pleased with the corrective action plan that they've submitted? Or
Yes.
okay,
Yes.
could you go into detail? You said it was COVID related, I think.
It was a COVID tracing grant. So what happened was there were basically technology Jackie knows more about this, so she's nodding me on. There were technology upgrades that they wanted to make through one of these grants, and what happened were there were significant supply chain issues. So they did not receive all of that equipment and have it installed by the end of the grant period. And therefore, the grants would say, well, if you don't have the stuff, I'm not going to give you the money. So there was a little bit of that going on, so that as of today, that health department has paid back those funds.
How much?
Do you remember the amount? I think, actually, I have it here.
It's about, is this on? It's about 67,000
Yeah.
that they've
67,000.
repaid, and I believe they're hoping to recoup that out of one of their other COVID grants.
Okay.
But unsure if they'll be able to.
So that was a common thing that's been happening with these grants. At the federal level, they say you have to have it obligated by the end of the grant period and then spent within a certain amount of days after that. And with all the supply chain issues, they thought they were going to get some of it and they didn't, and it ends up that they still don't even have some of it. So that is something we're required to look at when we look at those grants, and it's a very specific requirement in the federal compliance.
Yeah, you spoke to the
audit.
relationship you have with county administration staff, Steve, and his shop and so forth. What, and maybe, I'm trying to remember, Steve, what kind of awards or citations, positive citations, have we received regarding our overall accounting practices?
Yeah, you're referring to the GFOA Certificate of Award?
Is that what it is?
Financial Reporting Award, yeah.
Okay.
Which we received, and we'll submit, when this report is final for FY '22, we'll submit that for that review as well.
And what's the criteria for that?
It is comprehensive, and it's the 190 pages of information out for the reader to the public, disclosure, that we meet those. So it's not a financial position grade. It's more
Procedures,
disclosure,
policies.
as much disclosure as possible for the, the program and for the year-end report.
Thank you.
Chairman Wheeler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess, and Steve originally turned around to ask me, why is the health department on our audit? Since they're a separate fund with their own board and they handle their own billing and their own grant management, why would we have an audit finding for something that occurred there? And I guess that's what the question is, and they haven't had to hear this because we don't get these.
So under government accounting standards, they have a standard that defines the reporting entity for, financial statements. So the health department would probably be considered a component unit, although it doesn't technically meet the standards of their definition of a component unit. They are not legally separate from you. They cannot own property separate from the county. There's other criteria, like can they issue their own debt, things like that. And they were created at the pleasure of the board originally under state statute. So they still fall under the reporting umbrella of the county. Now you do have another component unit that falls under the county, and that does meet the official definition, and that's the Public Building Commission. The debt that they have right now is all the county's debt. So because really right now they exist for the benefit of the county, they are a blended component unit. So their numbers actually get rolled up also in your report. They're in some of those special funds that roll up in those non-major funds. And the health department rolls up in a non-major fund as well. They're not large enough to meet the criteria to be a major fund.
They're under our tax levy as well.
Yes, that's true.
Do they have our same EIN?
They have a separate EIN. I think the highway department has a separate EIN. There's been various reasons throughout history why different departments have separate FEINs.
And I guess the last thing for the committee's sake, a similar situation happened with this other grant we're talking about, with courts and the supply chain. They had to prepay and then it didn't show up. So we're looking for some paperwork on that. It's another internal controls thing, but it was at the behest of the courts. The Supreme Court said, order this now or pay us now. And so it's a really weird situation where they put us in a bind on their own grant.
Yeah, so basically that finding relates to how it's reported in the financial statements. Technically, the county outlaid the cash for the improvements before the installation and equipment was provided. So under accounting standards, that would be like a prepaid expense. And then the revenue would be recognized when you finally receive all of those services. So that was the reporting part of it. Now, the compliance piece was kind of the same thing I referred to with the health department. But if AOIC says, no, that's how we wanted it, that's okay, then it's not really out of compliance. They're not a federal grant, that's a state funded money. So that's the I guess, fine difference between the health department issue and the AOIC issue.
Gotcha.
So
Thank
does
you.
that clarify that?
I hope it helps the committee because they'll see it and it looks worse than it is, if you will, especially since they called us up on the grant manager for AOIC got a hold of us days within the expiration of the grant and said, pay for this or else you're losing it. Well, some of the equipment's still not here at this point. Yeah, and we weren't advised that this wasn't here. It was like, pay the grant, pay the bill, like they were receiving it. So
yeah, we're going to institute another step of communication. The folks that deal with this individually in departments don't realize some of the responsibilities we have in the financial reporting side, and if we don't know something did not get accomplished and not book it correctly, that's where some of this comes into play. So we're going to take another step and reach out and ask more questions and try to get more feedback, specifically for the capital grant activity, because of supply chain or other things that could interrupt a project and potentially put it past the date. So we're going to implement that and try to make sure that doesn't happen, and so that communication flows both ways, that we learn and make sure we get it booked correctly.
Essentially, it's an education process, and as we all learn and live and learn and go through the years, you learn different things. And obviously in the last 3 years we've been in a new world and so there's lots more to learn and figure out and navigate. So
any other questions from the committee? I actually have one question. So you were talking about rent. You can go ahead and tell if we're paying too high for rent or if we're not charging enough for rent. I just saw in our monthly claims that like the VAC is paying $2,400 a month for the Bourbonnais place. Could you go ahead and do an analysis on that for us?
We did an analysis on that, and it did fall below the threshold of like the quantitative materiality limits for the financial statements. So for cost benefit purposes, the finance department and Chairman Wheeler decided it was best to just continue without the complicated accounting for it.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
No other questions? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much.
We're on the subject. I want to thank all the departments as well for providing us information for the stat report and other information. So, we were kind of joking a little bit internally. There's a lot of work that goes into the stat reports that are at the end of the report, and our joke was, does anybody read these? That's a lot of work for hopefully somebody will read them. But I also want to thank Cindy Jacobson, who you met last month, and introduce Marissa Ray, who's our new WIOA staff accountant. She's a 2021 graduate of ONU, so our connection with ONU continues. Both of them did a great job. I had to jump in and do the MD&A and help with the MD&A and the stat reports, and this is all brand new information, and so they did a great job. And it's kind of a baptism by fire kind of a thing in a sense, because it has to be done within a certain period of time so we can get all the filing done. So that's what we've been doing the last 2 weeks. So, and that's why the nervous chuckle about, I hope somebody reads this, because all the work goes in for the stat report. So somebody please read it. Yeah, 'cause we put a lot of work into it, right? So, but thank you to them. So I won't spend a lot of time, and else people have questions, and we spent a lot of time today on other things for the reports. Quickly, the sales tax is coming in nice, and in addition to last year, higher than last year. A couple areas, income taxes slowed down some. We knew the PPRT was going to slow down, but we've actually collected this more in FY23 than we have than we did in FY21. So even though it's slowing down, it's still a nice number. And the bed rental is continuing to do well. So no issues really. Some of those are expected, and we'll continue to watch that trend. So not sure if there's any specific questions, but it's a few highlights.
Any questions from the committee? Chairman Wheeler.
Just more of a comment. We were looking at bed rental projections to try to decide what types of infrastructure, I want to say upgrades, but repairs need to be done on the old jail. At one point, we're saying, you know, if when ICE was shifted out of state, what's going to happen? We've replaced the beds, if you will, but it's at a lower rate. So at some point, this committee is probably going to see a proposal, a bid for to approve somewhat of a sizable expenditure to reseal all of the windows. It's leaking like a sieve over there, and we need to seal all these windows and replace them. So the bid process is going to probably begin. I just didn't want to surprise there, because it's not going to be a little bit of money, but the revenue is more than there to achieve. We just didn't want to invest in a building that we may not be using anymore. And so that's why I'm letting this committee know. I think it's time, and I think the sheriff would agree. So,
thank you, sir.
Yep.
Any other comments? Next up, cash flow update.
Nothing specific, no worries. Just puts a smile on my face, but I don't know if there's any questions overall. I want to keep everybody updated with it.
Questions? Questions from the committee? Chairman Wheeler?
June's 3 pay periods, right?
June is 3 pay periods. Yes.
Our employees will love it. Thank you.
and no tax distribution. So yeah, that's why I'm smiling.
All right, next up is claims for recommended for approval, not for approval.
Yeah, we have one this month. I believe Nick wants to speak to this one for Weba Productions.
Steve, is this on?
Yeah.
Steve, can you read the note that was at the bottom? There was a note that Steve sent this to me, and this was the note at the bottom.
Are these
digital images only? Question mark. Are the photos on display conspicuously for the benefit of the public? Question mark. Thanks.
So I responded to, when I got that claim, I responded to the auditor via email and answered those 2 questions. And then I asked him, I would appreciate if you approve this, which he responded to me that he wasn't not approving it. I guess he just was asking questions, but it seemed like a long drawn out way to ask a question of me, when if you simply would have emailed the question to me, I would have responded as quick as I did when I got the claim.
So question, did you have to reach out to the auditor, or the auditor reached out to you?
No, I reached out to the auditor.
So it's backwards. Okay.
Yeah. And he let me know that this was technically not recommended, but, and I didn't go back and forth, but the question is, if you just throw questions out into the ether, how do they get answered, right? And if you have those questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them. Just shoot me an email, and then you don't have to write it on Steve's claim, and then it goes through this rigmarole where we don't know if it's recommended or not.
And to take care of the vendor, you know, I mean, we have to take care and pay our vendors.
Yep.
And if we wouldn't we see those, and we're the only ones that reach out to try to keep the communication going, to get the answers, to get the vendors paid. So as Chairman Wheeler's, we're not trying to be a secretary or do anything for the auditor's office. We're trying to take care of the vendor. That's our main focus, is take care of the vendor, because otherwise it would stop, you know. So we try to keep it moving, and it still had to come here, wait 3 weeks or whatever.
And in fairness, the questions are fair. I mean, he's the auditor. Ask the questions, but it seems like a roundabout way to get 2 quick answers. Just send me an email. I'll respond to him. Then you don't have to have it go to Steve. Come here.
And this vendor's had to wait 3 to 4 weeks.
And he's a small
to come back to the next monthly meeting.
Small business owner. So
lack of communication, same circus. Can I have a motion to approve? Motion by Mr. Swanson, second by Mr. Dunnell. Any other discussion? Chairman Wheeler.
Briefly, the state statute that must be followed and is not says that the auditor must approve or not approve all claims made against the county. By not signing the form, that is not approving a claim. It has to be signed off on. So for him to say he's not approving or disapproving it actually is completely wrong. We have to see that signature in order to process it, or we have to bring it into this committee to go ahead and approve it without the approval, because this is not an approval. A question is not approval or denial.
Yep.
Not signing it is a denial.
Or if he had a question about it, he should have asked the treasurer.
A
So
recommendation not to approve, because the auditor doesn't have that authority to deny anything.
Quickly be resolved.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Internally.
I've seen them for pennies, folks, literally on utility bills that don't get paid, and they're gonna cut it off because the bill was rounded up by a penny. It's just insane. So.
we have a motion on the floor. Any other discussion? Roll call.
Mr. Eckhoff?
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield? Mr. Hess? Ms. Polk?
Aye.
Ms. Weber?
Aye.
Ms. Parker? Mr. Swanson?
Aye.
Mr. Featherling?
Aye.
Mr. Dunniel? Mr. Miller? Mr. Long?
Aye.
Mr. Hunter? Mr. Wheeler? Mr. Alexander Hildebrand?
Motion carries. Next up, monthly claims. Anything to highlight?
Nothing specific, unless there's any questions.
Any questions from the committee? If not, I'll take a motion to approve the monthly claims. Motion by Mr. Hunter, second by Mr. Swanson. Discussion? If not, roll call.
Mr. Eckhoff?
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield? Mr. Hess? Ms. Polk?
Aye.
Ms. Weber?
Aye.
Ms. Parker? Mr. Swanson? Mr. Featherling?
Aye.
Mr. Dunniel? Mr. Miller? Mr. Long?
Aye.
Mr. Hunter? Mr. Wheeler? Mr. Alexander Hildebrand? Motion carries.
Motion carries. Next up is ARPA funding request.
First one, we left on the agenda, but it's still a work in progress. So there's nothing that can be voted on. We're still awaiting tax information. We thought we might have it and be able to have a recommendation, but unfortunately we do not. So we'll have to continue on that one for a future date.
Okay, next up is Country Girls Kitchen.
Yeah, this one is here for a denial. The request, I'll read it, for the reason for request of funding to require a modest building that will house home/cooking/catering/service training for all at-risk youth ages 13 to 18. We've asked for tax forms. The tax forms did not support from the financial side, and that's similar to our catering business that we approved, for items for the business-wise, and all they provided was building information, and ARPA does not allow for new building construction. Just, it's not part of that. So since that's the angle they took, I did communicate with them and ask them, if there's anything else they wanted to share with the committee and or withdraw, and I did not hear anything. So we'll have to go through the motion of denying this application.
Can I have a motion to deny? Motion by Ms. Parker, second by Mr. Dunnell. Discussion? If not, voice vote. All in favor say aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next up is county clerk lost revenue.
Yeah, this is a lost revenue project. The email from Dan Hendrickson stating that the voting booths are in a state of disrepair. He received 2 quotes. One was for $80,216.55, and the other was for $59,447.15. So recommendation will be to go with the lowest quote, which is the company.
Mr. Hunter, question or motion?
Motion.
Motion to approve by Mr. Hunter, second by Mr. Dunnell. Any discussion? I would agree that these booths working the election for Dan for the last couple of years, it's definitely needed. Would you agree with that, Carol?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Wheeler.
Would this money go sit in his elections account until it's time to be spent? I'm just curious, how do we follow that money flow? Or is it just that we pay it out of the general fund? You kind of see where I'm going. It's do we want to account for the spend and knowing, tagging it to his election spend for his own? And I'm just curious how
this will be a lost revenue. It's coming out of lost revenue budget. It's separate.
We're not sending.
It's not general fund at all.
Okay. All right.
Any other discussions? This will be a voice vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next up is Limestone Fire Protection District for a grapple hook boat repair.
Yes. Yeah, they have a the grapple hook boat repair with a specific. They sent us 50, 60 pages of detail. They do have. I gave you the summary of all the repairs that we have the detail for. And the total of $20,225.26 for the repair. So that's the recommended amount from lost revenue if the committee, if it's so.
So this page with this title right here.
Yeah.
Okay, so the page that actually has the cost breakdown is what we're voting on for that for 20,000. What was the dollar amount?
$20,225.26.
Motion to approve. Discussion?
I just wanted to mention, this is the, how do I put this? Above the dam, you see a lot of rescue boats. We'll still have one, we're helping them out with a rescue hydrofoil boat, just like Aroma Township got. This is for the unfortunate, when something happens above the dam, it floats down the river, and this is for body recovery and things like that. So I just wanted to let people know that this is an essential part of the river continuum. It's just not fixing a boat. It's the grapple boat that recovers the remains of people that have floated down the river. I just want to make sure it's clear. We're going to be helping them twice, and it's necessary in the area. So throwing it out there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I have a motion to approve $20,225.26 for their grapple boat repair reimbursement? Motion by Ms. Polk, second by Mr. Long. Can I have a voice vote? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries. Can I have a motion to combine and approve the ARPA reports? Motion by Mr. Dunnell, second by Mr. Swanson. Any other discussion? If not, roll call.
Mr. Eckhoff?
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield? Aye. Mr. Hess? Aye. Ms. Polk?
Aye.
Ms. Weber?
Aye.
Ms. Parker? Aye. Mr. Swanson? Aye. Mr. Featherlane?
Aye.
Mr. Dunnell? Aye. Mr. Miller? Aye. Mr. Long?
Aye.
Mr. Hunter? Aye. Mr. Wheeler? Mr. Alexander Hildebrand? Aye. Motion carries.
Motion carries. Next up is Social Services, KCCSI.
If there's Mr. Hunter, if you would like to speak to any of this, I can tee it up for everybody if you like. So
Chairman Wheeler.
Thank you. The first cover page in there is just like all the other ones that we have sent to the board. If there is a recommendation, And so to start off with, we were recommending approval of this in a modified amount of $186,965 for their submitted programming through 11/30 of '24. It's 11/30/24 because of obviously budget years and things like that. We're trying to keep everything aligned. And then that was unanimous on the committee. We worked with this group. It was a pleasure working with Mr. Clark. Brought in KCC to, I don't want to say support the program and add their personal expertise, and you see a couple of letters of recommendation in there for that. And so the only real change was, and where we came up with the 186, as opposed to the original 450. Well, the 450 included the $100,000 for the voucher program, housing voucher. So that's out of there already. And then we took the approach of funding this through the end of next year to give them a lot of runway to get this program out there and to get people into the pipeline and to start gathering the data to see if this is working. Are we getting people mostly from the north and east side of Kankakee and Hopkins Park engaging in first assessing what they like to do, what they're good at, and then what either vocational, career center, or KCC, Prairie State, all the different colleges, what coursework supports what they're either gonna want to try to approach in whatever venue that might end up being, so, or vocation, should I say. So it's just not a college degree program or certificate program. It could be, or excuse me, it could be a certificate. It could be an entryway into the diesel program that we've already funded. It could be something that exists at our jail for people that are getting out. And you know, there's lots of different things that we're looking at, but it's really accessing those communities, mainly of color, that have not taken advantage of, for whatever reason, that assessment, and then connecting that to what's available locally and regionally. So I hope I explained that properly, Mr. Hunter.
Yeah, I think,
Mr. Hunter.
Thank you, very much, Mr. Chairman. Very valuable, thorough review of the approval process in terms of cutting back on contractual services, some other areas, travel, et cetera. There's going to be a finite review of the activities and the assessment, and been given assurances if things go well, we'll be able to provide the additional funds with scrutinization for KCCSI. As the chairman indicated, Reverend Clark came to the chairman and regarding the voucher program, and I think you guys agreed that we kicked, I think up front, there was it 33,000? Was that 33,000?
Yeah.
Yeah,
333.33.
Yeah, and we took care of that. So we have a lot of faith in Reverend Clark, and I think probably that's probably the major reason as to why we have the confidence in providing the 186,965 for this program.
Thank you, Mr. Hunter. And this program is going through 11/30 of '24.
Correct. Just so we could leave time if we wanted to reallocate
Extend
more
it
funds
out for
towards
until
it. Yeah,
okay.
Another 2 years. We want to see the funnel get filled, you know, and then determining what success looks like. That'll be more of a conversation, because obviously you're not going to get people into a 4-year degree program and graduated before the end. So that's not a metric, but are they moving down that path? How many people do we get to show up to these events with the mobile RV unit, where they're bringing it to the churches and the community out there, instead of making people come all the way to KCC? That's really the goal behind really everything we've tried to do here is with the ARPA money, is to connect people that are could meet where their services could be handed off from one to the other. And a lot of people took advantage of it, and I will see KCC, SI and KCC both grab the opportunity to work together, which is important.
If I could too, just to piggyback on that as well too, I mean, there were frank conversations with KCCSI and KCC with respect to services being provided, availability, and I think it was a viable venue, for them to have a meeting of the minds and come up with a good work product and a good plan. So, kudos to Reverend Clark as well as Dr. Boyd.
Yes, Steve.
Question on, and through this discussion for this program, the funding levels all up front, reimbursement, we've had increments in some of the recommendation. What is this one supposed to be?
Sure. And I'd have to take a look and maybe we put those on for the full board. I think we can, but things like textbooks, we should pay for up front. Because we could cut a check for textbooks because they have to be used at the event. The travel, the workshop stuff could be reimbursement. But realize this is a cash poor organization. They get grant money in, they spend it all, and because if you don't spend it, you don't get it the next year. So we have to be cognizant of that, work with them as much as we can on this aspect. But the difference here is we're going to have an agent auditing the receipts and the expenditures. So if we see the normal expenses, that's one thing. We start to, and we won't. But if we see PlayStation 3 and whatever else, then
there's
we
4s now.
Well, maybe that's education.
Yeah,
I don't know.
5s now. Wow.
But you see where I'm going with this. We have monitoring going on at the expenditures. That is a bonded monitor that is able to pay things back if the feds ask for the money back. That's key in this.
Yep.
We have 2 layers of protection.
Could I have a motion really quickly to go ahead and approve through 11/30/24 of the amount of $186,965? Motion by Ms. Polk, second by Mr. Hunter. All right, continue discussion.
Yeah, and making that motion or seconding that motion, Reverend Clark has interfaced substantially with Chairman Wheeler regarding this particular matter. Now, a legitimate question from Steve McCarty regarding upfront money. So I would assume that Reverend Clark and the chairman would share with the evaluation team the need, if indeed upfront money is needed. And as the chairman has indicated, the KCCSI organization is cash-strapped. So I would assume that at the next board meeting we'd probably do that up front, or as much as we possibly can to assist them in their plight.
Yeah, and that's why I asked for a motion just through that time frame. Leave it open. Any other discussion from the committee? If not, I'll ask for a roll call.
Mr. Eckhoff?
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield? Mr. Hess? Aye. Ms. Polk?
Aye.
Ms. Weber? Aye. Ms. Parker? Mr. Swanson? Aye. Mr. Featherling?
Aye.
Mr. Dunno? Aye. Mr. Miller? Aye. Mr. Long?
Aye.
Mr. Hunter?
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler?
Aye.
Mr. Alexander Hildebrand?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Motion carries. Next up is Merchant Street Art Gallery, Purse Museum.
All right.
Chairman Wheeler.
It's a European man bag. It's not a purse. No, I'm just kidding.
Somebody put that on the agenda.
So this was part of the request from Merchant Street Art Gallery, obviously servicing people on the spectrum, and we funded already part of their request. This was sitting off to the side. We're recommending that this gets tabled indefinitely until that's figured out from the Purse Museum. Because while I cannot get into the specifics of this because it's a ZBA PZA issue, they're applying to change the zoning and use that former Homestar building in Diversitech as the Purse Museum. So we'd be getting way ahead of ourselves if we were to go down this road. I think you should make a determination as a board when it's a kind of a clean slate. Once they know what they're doing, what their funding is going to be, how their business model is set up, and then we could revisit that. That would be, and that was a committee recommendation that this one needs to kind of just sit off on the table until, but not a denial. Just come back when you got it together.
Can I have a motion to table this. Mr. Dunnell, second by Ms. Weber. Any other discussion from the evaluation team? All in favor to go ahead and table, say aye.
Aye.
No? Motion carries. Next up is Still I Rise.
Similar in the fact that as you see in there, we're also recommending tabling. Just to reiterate, we don't make the decisions. Steve doesn't make the decisions. This committee and the board does. We just recommend, and they can go outside if they wish. But in this case, we did not get what we consider key pieces of information to be able to judge the effectiveness of the program. It's a wonderful organization. It's a great idea, but we're waiting on some key information to figure out the partnership that needs to exist in order to make this happen within the environment they're working. So I guess if there's any other comment there, Steve, from the committee, Carol was in those meetings as well, so she can comment if she has anything.
Ms. Weber?
Thank you. I just concur that we needed to see something that had happened in the past and we didn't get it. Doesn't mean it wasn't there, we just haven't seen it yet.
Would you like to make the motion to table?
I do.
Motion by Ms. Weber, second by Mr. Fairfield. Any other discussion?
No debate on the motion to table.
Okay, no debate on the motion to table. There we go, Mr. Parliamentarian. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
It comes with the salary of this too, by the way.
Well, thank you very much, Steve.
Remind me to tell Wes we have enough money to run the air in this.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think it's hotter in here than outside, but
I think he turned the switch off. Save money, right?
I think Joe Swanson's gonna come around with a bucket for the money for the AC. Can I have a motion to combine and approve the treasurer's report? Motion by Mr. Dunnell, second by Mr. Miller. Any discussion from the committee? All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Aye. Motion carries. Mr. Africano.
Joanne, it's good to see you. Kelly Fillin and John Featherling, I hope you're coming along, getting well.
Getting there.
Tax bills were at the post office on Monday. Chris Breach from the Daily Journal was nice enough to put something in today, which talks about the fact that they were put in the mail, and due dates are the 28th of June. It's the first due date. Second due date is September 6th. You can still pay multiple payments if you want. So we're getting ready for the crush of people. And I think it's important to note that the easiest way to pay your taxes is to pay them at a bank drive-through. And you don't have to be a member of the bank. So you can go to any bank that has a drive-through. Everybody takes our taxes except PNC. So you can go to any bank, whether you're a member there or not, and pay your taxes in the drive-through. So that's the easiest way. Of course, you can mail them in. You can come here. You can use the drop box outside. You can pay them online. There's a lot of ways to do it. And I guess since I just mentioned PNC, I've been endeavoring to get all of our funds out of PNC. And I've asked all the department heads and people that have funds at PNC, and I think we're just about done. And the reason is simple. If they don't take our tax and work with us, it doesn't really make sense for us to give our business to them. Absolutely. I guess a bit of good news is, and I think Steve probably knows the answer to this. The ARPA funding, I believe, Steve, is by law we are allowed to keep the interest. And so we are probably right now, and I can get you an exact number. It fluctuates, of course, but we're about $30,000 to $35,000 a month right now. We're making on interest, beautiful, which is something that hasn't happened, frankly, since I was elected. So I'm pretty happy about that. And just in case anybody is interested, as of right today, Illinois Funds is paying us 5.13 on a daily basis, and of course that changes every day, but today is 5.13. We just hired a bilingual summer worker, so we're really happy about that. There's a new video sign at our office, in the front of our office. When you head down, you can see it. If anybody knows of something that's community oriented that needs to be advertised, certainly we would consider putting something up while the people are here paying their taxes. The last thing I want to mention is very important, and it's something that we haven't seen since I began. There is a case that was argued before the U.S. Supreme Court roughly a week to two ago. The case is titled Tyler v. Hennepin. Comes out of Hennepin County, Minneapolis. Essentially, the long and short of it is a woman's taxes were delinquent. Her property was eventually sold and disposed of for $35,000, I think, and she owed $15,000. And it appears that the Supreme Court is going to rule on her side, which essentially will say that a municipality or a county or a government entity cannot profit from the sale of a piece of property. They can recoup their $15,000, but if there's money above and beyond that, it has to go back to the taxpayer. That looks like where the Supreme Court's going to come down on that. That would affect 18 states, of which we are one of them. Looking back, it doesn't happen very often here. But it has, and it typically, and a lot of things are still in flux. We don't know which way things will go, but our trustee would probably, our Kankakee County trustee, Joseph Meyer and Associates, would probably be our best resource at the end of the day, how we go from here. The big question is, how far back, if they rule in her favor, how far back does this go?
So no statute of limitations at this point?
Right, nobody knows,
okay.
Right? Because the argument is that this violates the takings clause and that the excessive fines clause of the Constitution. So it'll be an interesting case, but based on the arguments, the justices seemed pretty much on the woman's side that you can't profit off their loss.
Chairman Wheeler?
It's going to destroy land banks.
Well, it will. Yeah, it will have lots of changes and challenges, and it'll be interesting to see the way that I think it'll be interesting to see the way then states go about and rewrite legislation to deal with it, because fees, it'll probably end up hurting people that actually redeem their taxes. They get sold, the lien gets sold, but they redeem, because I would imagine the legislature will put really large fees for a way to continue to make the dollar value go up. But yes, Andy, it'll have some serious consequences on lots of things, and land bank being one of them.
And so the committee knows that the land bank would acquire a property outside of the tax sale. It could be condemnation. It could be all these different avenues. People have over $1 million in liens because they haven't done X, Y, or Z to their property. Those all get wiped away. The land bank then can have a developer redevelop it, and the spread from what they acquired it for in legal fees and what they've sold it to that developer, that's profit to go out and buy more properties.
Right.
For what you're saying, that kneecaps that whole process.
Well, I and of course, I'm certainly not going to render a legal opinion, but I think it's the argument might be apples to apples, right? If it's a property that you took and then you just put it on the market and sold it, it wouldn't, may not have, we sell tons of surplus properties at opening bid of like $800. But there have been properties we've sold for 20,000. And when you get into the higher value, you know, that's when it becomes more difficult. There's a lot of properties that people don't bid on. Yes, Steve.
Hold on really quick. I have a question. So with the tax sale, so when you don't go ahead and pay your property taxes and somebody puts interest on your, since you didn't go ahead and pay your property tax, do you think that the Supreme Court's going to go ahead and say you can't go ahead and put that much interest on it? Or are they going to go ahead and cap that? Or are they going to at the state level to go ahead and make that decision?
I don't think there's the only thing that I think that they're dealing with is the idea that you can sell somebody's property that you've taken for and keep the money beyond what they owed you.
Okay. Mr. Hunter.
Yeah, I don't know if Nick or Andy can, Chairman Willer can respond to this. What's happening with the, what's the status of the Kresge building at this point? Does anybody know?
Well, Steve, you're dating yourself by calling it the Kresge building. There's a lot of people who don't even know what Kresge is, but I
used to
do.
go there with my mom and have lunch and stuff.
I sit at the counter, right? Have a grilled cheese.
Yeah.
Yep. I don't know. Is that a property the land bank is looking at?
Yeah.
Aware of.
Okay.
It's one of those where there is substantial liens. An out-of-town person thinks they've got $1 million property.
Yeah,
that has
of course.
parking, so it's just sitting there undeveloped or undeveloped and dead.
And it's terrible eyesore for the crossroads of the community.
Yeah.
You know, and I should mention, in regard to the land bank, I have taken one of my staff members and. They will be attending all land bank meetings. So we'll coordinate, and I've been coordinating with Dr. Crawford and Chairman Sanford to work with them as best we can.
Very good.
Anybody else? Enjoy this beautiful weather.
Inside or outside?
Well, inside.
See you later, International Star.
I can't believe you made me wait the whole time.
You're welcome. The auditor's office, still it's been 1,153 days since the auditor has reported to this committee.
How many days is that down?
1,153 days. And he has collected a salary of $219,700, not including benefits or retirement. Next up is other business.
Shots fired.
Old or new business. Mr. Hess has left us, so who would like to go ahead and make the motion to adjourn? Motion by Ms. Parker, second by Ms. John, do you have something?
Second.
Second by Mr. Fedling. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.